challenge directly and care personally. This mindset, it's absolutely critical for creating trusting and collaborative environments within your teams. As leaders, we took on so much more than just trying to drive numbers during COVID, right? Like the empathetic approach and just being a good leader, being there for your team kind of took a step up. People want to work for inspiring leaders. They want to work for a leader who's going to bring out the best in them. And so this mindset and philosophy, it gives you the opportunity to help them develop throughout their careers while also caring about them as a person. And also, when you're making decisions as a leader, you have to consult with your team, right? If I can make a decision that is going to directly affect my team and the business, I want to hear from them. What's going to make you most effective in working in your day-to-day work? What's going to make you most productive? How are we going to work together? What can I help you with? These are things that I want to ask them and get their feedback. So those are a few elements of the open and transparent conversation.
Spotlight, brought to you by CSN Focus, where we refine customer success, uniting GTM teams across North America.
Welcome to the CSN Focus podcast. Let's welcome Ryan Lazar, the dynamic country manager for Canada at Qualtrics and an adept leader in the SaaS industry. Ryan combines his engineering acumen with his sales expertise to drive significant revenue growth and build high-performing and engaged teams. He's known for his strategic vision in revenue growth and commitment to fostering a culture of success and passion within his teams. So, Ryan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thanks so much for having me. It's always weird hearing your profile being read back to you, and I hope I meet to some of those aspirations that you shared.
Well, your reputation precedes you, so I believe that they do. Anything you would like to add and introduce yourself to the folks listening?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say, I'm really looking forward to the call and the topic. I've had the opportunity. What I'll say is just a little bit about myself too. I'm from Windsor originally, so small town, blue collar city. And quite honestly, that gave me a lot of like the work ethic that I have here today. So moved to Toronto 16 years ago. Culture shock, to say the least. But it was definitely the David versus Goliath, the underdog mentality that has kind of taken me throughout my career.
Great. Awesome. Well, can't wait to learn more about you and from you. So I'll introduce myself really quickly as well. I'm Elizabeth Italiano and one of the hosts here for the CSN Focus podcast. But that's really enough about me. We want to hear more from Ryan. So let's get into it. So I understand that you are a big fan of radical candor, and given your focus on building strong cultures of success, I'd love to start our conversation there. So the first question that I have for you is, how do you define radical candor, and why is it crucial to building an engaged sales team?
Yeah, so radical candor, actually, it's been embedded into our culture at Qualtrics. So Kim Scott, who is the founder of Radical Candor, she was on our board a few years back. And so the way we've looked at like our sales methodology, our leadership methodology has all been really based around that. And so I was fortunate enough to get some very firsthand training from Kim, from Russ Laraway also. I worked with Kim on Radical Candor. The main concept of the book, I mean, it's an incredible book if you have not read it, and philosophy in general. Definitely as a leader, you have to read it. This is a must read. This is the number one pick I always say when people ask me, is challenge directly and care personally. Mm-hmm. And this mindset, it's absolutely critical for creating trusting and collaborative environments within your teams. As leaders, we took on so much more than just trying to drive numbers during COVID really too, right? Like the empathetic approach and just being a good leader, being there for your team kind of took a step up. People want to work for inspiring leaders. They want to work to a leader who's going to bring out the best in them. And so this mindset and philosophy, it gives you the opportunity to help them develop throughout their careers while also caring about them as a person.
That must have been a very fascinating experience, getting to work directly with those really amazing individuals. Anything in particular that stood out to you, like beyond the book and what you learned in the book from that experience?
So yes, absolutely. How they rolled out some of the training, I'll talk about this a little bit later too. It focuses on getting to know the individual, knowing that you're going to be working with them. It's not like like the days 20, 30 years ago when our parents were in the workforce where they had the same job at the same company for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it's you report up to a leader or someone reports into you, the time that you have to help develop and work directly with someone is so limited in today's world. If it's 4 years, then we're lucky, right? Mm-hmm. And so in those 4 years, what are you doing as a leader to really help propel them to get to their peak of where they want to be in their career?
Yeah, you're right. The span of opportunity that we have in time to work with our teams is shorter and seems to be getting shorter. So you're right. It's capitalizing on that time that you do have is great because it is a small world as well. Getting referrals, references, maybe working with them again at another company. So that's awesome. So the next question that I wanted to chat with you about is how you foster an environment of radical candor with your sales team and how you get them to embrace this approach. So you mentioned to challenge with feedback, but care personally. I don't think I completely quoted you 100% right. But
challenge directly, care personally.
Challenge directly, care personally. So is that part of how you get teams to embrace the approach? What else do you include there?
Yeah, it absolutely is. But in that too, your team members need to know it's coming from a good spot. Right. And so I'm always of the mindset that like trust is earned, right? It's not something that you automatically jump into a role. And if you lead someone, well, then they need to trust you. That's not the case at all. And it is earned. So there's a couple things that, I feel like I've been able to develop really good relationships with the people I work with. First and foremost is just having like open and transparent conversations. I'm just being an open book. Sometimes to my fault, I probably overshare with my team, but we drink our own champagne, right? So Qualtrics as an organization, we focus on experience management, so customer employee experience, and we do quarterly pulses, right? So what that means is on a quarterly basis, we will collect feedback from everyone in the organization. It's fortunate because we do it real time. That feedback collection is actually, we have dashboards that are created for each individual people leader. So me as a people leader, I can actually see what the results are, what my team's saying and how they feel. That in itself that is one element. The second piece to that, the one that really matters, is taking action. And local action is by far the best action. So local action being like a direct leader to their reports. And what you should be doing is sharing those results immediately with your team, bringing everyone together, collecting the feedback. And listen, they're not always pretty. And when they're not, it's tougher, but you're always trying to get better. And I've seen over my career, especially being at Qualtrics, where we've done this on a regular basis, by doing that, you earn the trust of the team. You show that you are listening. And then the second piece is you need to take action as well. So you just can't listen to them and sit on your hands. You need to be action biased and drive some of this. So open and transparent, that's one element. Sometimes I share them and maybe sometimes overshare, but I keep them in the know, right? Like with broader organizational updates, when I find out, and I'm going to share those updates, right? Share how it impacts them as well too, so they're not caught off guard with some things. And also when you're making decisions as a leader, you have to consult with your team, right? Where necessary, there's some decisions you have to make because you just have to make them, without consultation. But if I can make a decision that is going to directly affect my team and the business, I want to hear from them. What's going to make you most effective in working in your day-to-day working? What's going to make you most productive? How are we going to work together? What can I help you with? These are things that I want to ask them and get their feedback. So those are a few elements of the open and transparent conversation. The second piece is showing vulnerability as a leader, right? It's the common questions that I ask is, how can I better support you? Where can I improve as a leader? And so those are things that I have a weekly one-on-one with all of my direct reports, and those are things I ask every single week.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So a few things that I really picked up there. So a bias for action, making them participants, the team participants in the process. So it's not just I'm talking at you and giving you this feedback. It's okay. Let's have this as a two-way conversation as opposed to I'm just giving you feedback. And then the other one thing that I've seen in organizations, and good on you for making sure you and your team pay attention to, is that, okay, you do these surveys, but then nothing happens with them. And then people stop caring. It's like, oh, another survey. Why am I going to bother? Because nothing gets done with it. So I think that is the really key thing, and good on you for focusing on that, because unfortunately I've seen a lot of organizations that stop at the collection of the survey.
Well, that's what we do as a business. So for anyone listening, if you want feedback on that, how to address it, I can talk all day about that piece, and it's fun and exciting.
Yeah, but you embrace, like you said, you drink your own champagne and you embrace that in your own internal culture, which is great. So when it comes to, getting this participation, having a two-way engagement on feedback and it going both ways, I imagine that this also helps to create an environment that's really strong for things like sales training, strong onboarding program. So a topic that I personally find does not get talked about enough is that many companies do lack a focus in proper sales training and onboarding. And I'd love to hear from you how you integrate Radical Candor into the sales training and onboarding process.
Yeah, so it's all, as I mentioned, like when I started, I was given the book Radical Candor, and that's when Kim Scott was on our board. It's a big part of our responsibility as leaders, getting to know the individual as a person, right? It's a different environment than what it was. And I think even like through some of the challenging times that we just had, people experienced a lot of challenges. And for us as leaders, we just weren't driving a number, right? We were helping to keep our teams engaged and make sure that we could help alleviate some of the challenges maybe they were facing on a professional side to help them on their personal side, right? And kind of bringing it together. So we've actually developed, like through the Radical Candor program, a career coaching program. It's been fantastic. There's really 3 elements to it. The first, and I recommend that every single meeting happens in person with the individual. Doing it over Zoom or over a video conference, it just doesn't give the same type of you're not breaking bread. You're not building that connection. And these are good conversations to have, right? And so you want to do it in person. The first piece is the life story, which is sometimes for people a little awkward. So the life story is, tell me about yourself. Start as far back as you want. You can go to kindergarten and just tell me a bit about yourself. Tell me about, how you grew up. Tell me about did you play sports? Were you into music? What did your family dynamic, like brothers, sisters, things like that, right? And it's interesting because I will say you really get to know the person. Not once have I went into that thinking, oh yeah, I know who this person is, and come out like I didn't learn anything. You learn so much about them, and it's amazing. And then the second element of that is really, we talked about it earlier, is what are their aspirations of their career? Where do they want to be at the pinnacle of their career? What type of organization, size, industry, role specifically? So that's the second element. And when you're understanding that piece, what you want to do is develop what are the skills needed. Is it marketing? Is it product? Is it sales? Like what are these different skills? And where do you fit on that scale, like in that specific department or knowledge on a scale of like a 1 to 3? Right? Where can we work on together? And then that's where the third and final component comes in. And that's really is taking action. So we talked about it is you have this short period of time that you're working with the individual. And so what can you do to help them improve those areas where they need to make improvements to get to the pinnacle of their career in what you're doing today? Maybe it's a mentorship program. Maybe it's taking on additional responsibilities. Maybe it's totally outside of, the walls of your organization, but you're helping fund something or career development, right? So there's been a lot of different things that have come up, but really those 3 elements: life story, where they want to be at the pinnacle in their career, and then actions to take and what you can do to develop those areas of opportunity.
That's great. I really like the idea of getting someone's life story, because you do really start to understand what their motivations are, like what excites. And, we're all complex individuals. So getting that kind of full view, I definitely see how that would be helpful. So what about measurement? I mean, I'm always looking for ways to track and measure effectiveness of any program. How do you measure the effectiveness of Radical Candor in your team's engagement and performance?
Come on, Elizabeth, having a sales background, really? You're measuring?
I know, shock, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, same. I'm measuring everything possible, right? And we're always trying to get better. That's just, I think, what a lot of us think about. So there's a couple things where we run our quarterly pulse engagements, right? And so in that, there are results that come out. There are numbers that come out. We always say you don't want to be chasing a number, so to say. You want to really get into the weeds and try to take action. But there's a couple elements. The first element is that manager effectiveness score. So again, this is on you, right? So sometimes you see it and it's like, wow, okay, I need to improve, right? And sometimes it's good and it's like, okay, I'm doing the right things, but what can I be doing better? And so that manager effectiveness score gives you a good gauge of, am I doing everything I can to support my team? That's really the first one that we always look at. The second one kind of falls into 5 categories broken up. It's our EX5 philosophy through Qualtrics. So this is built by IO psychologists, individuals who are much smarter than I am, who have already pre-built this in our dashboards. And so it's built on these 5 factors, right? Through the questions: engagement, well-being, inclusion, experience versus expectations, and intent to stay. So you look at those 5 critical areas, and those are, when I have my follow-up meeting with the team, that's where we kind of dissect a little deeper into.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that really gives you things to focus on, and it's not just really indicative gut feel. It's okay, this is what the numbers are telling me. Here's where we can make some decisions on where to focus. The manager effectiveness score is really interesting as well, because one thing that I've seen in the industry is, because there's been so much massive growth, well, I guess pre-2023, there was so much massive growth in tech and SaaS. There was a lot of individual contributors that were high performers and then put in management roles, directors, VPs, some even C-suite roles very, very quickly, and didn't have the training or the background on people management. Yeah. And the skill set as an individual contributor is a lot different than when you're managing people. And when I think back to the first time I was a manager, when I think of some of the things that I did, I'm like, oh my goodness. But I had a good boss, so I got some coaching and that sort of thing. But I think the manager effective score, that's really interesting, because I think that a lot of people could use some guidance, and through no fault of their own. There was a lot of growth. People had to move quickly. So I really appreciate you walking through that, because there's a lot people could learn from and focus on there. So the other question that I wanted to chat with you about is balancing feedback and empathy in your leadership style. So feedback's not always easy to give or get, and bringing in empathy is a key part. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is the trust, right? So your team needs to know that it's coming from a good place, and that you are in it for them, that you are working for them, that you are trying to help them. Trust is not something you just flip the switch and have it right away, right? It's developed, it's earned. And so I think the number one thing is just earning that trust, and doing so by leading from the front. I will never ask my team to do anything that I will not do. And so they recognize that. They know that if they ever need to get a hold of me, I'm not a leader where they can't find me. So being accessible as a leader too, you really need to be there for the team. If they know that they could text, I'm texting them back within 5 minutes.
That's awesome.
Unless I'm on a podcast with you, then they might have to.
Well, I wouldn't be offended. I mean, they take precedence. So. All right. Yeah, that's awesome. So I think that's also a good segue into another kind of line of topics that I wanted to chat with you about. And that's about the change in environment that we've been all operating in. There's been 2023 and even so far 2024 for a lot of companies have still been really challenging. And there's been a decrease in performance. So if we look at Pavilion in the industry as a whole, if you look at the report that Pavilion recently released, some of the highlights from the report are win rate declines by 18% when comparative to 2022. If we compare it to 2021, win rates have been actually down by 27%. Sales cycles timelines have decreased by 16%. And on top of that, we have average deal values that have decreased by 21% on average. So we have less wins, a longer time to get wins. And that has all been compounded by average deal crease in value by that 21%, like I mentioned. And so it's been a struggle for a lot of sales teams and any go-to-market team, really. Yeah. And so there's been a need for feedback and communication that we were just talking about a few moments ago. So given these recent challenges that we've seen in B2B sales, how have you adjusted your team's go-to-market strategy? And I'd also love to tie that back into the last question around the feedback and empathy and how your team has kind of responded, and if you've had to adjust how you've approached feedback or the type of feedback given the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're absolutely one. Like I'm going to take those stats and send them to my leader, so he knows, which he already does. But it's incredibly difficult. For 2023 was probably the most challenging year for a number of go-to-market professionals. It was a struggle. Our Canadian business at Qualtrics, we were fortunate. We were the leading market unit in our region last year. And so about 30% of our team is going to President's Club as well. So we had a great finish to the year. We had some incredible wins across the team. Having said that, it was a fight. Budgets were incredibly tight. Competition is very high. The buyers are just smarter today. So, if I break that down, budgets, like we were not just competing, and I've talked to a lot of other SaaS leaders, you're not just competing against your direct competitors anymore. That's not the case. You're competing for the overall tech spend in an organization. And so you really need to make yourself relevant. You need to show the value in your product early to executives. And then when I talk about just buyers are smarter, I mean, they have access to so much information out there. So it's when you're going to talk with them, you need to be a thought leader. You can't go in and not really own the room and show your industry and how you can help improve their current situation based on what you've done for others. And so having those proof points is also incredibly helpful. So I look at really three things in the go-to-market strategy and things we focused on: people, process, and prioritization in what's happened. So people, really building with those opportunities that you're pursuing, making sure you have executive sponsorship, being in there early, often. But as an executive sponsor, you need to remove yourself from the day-to-day conversations and meetings, right? So as an exec sponsor, I was talking with someone the other day where they asked me that question and they were struggling to separate themselves, right? Because they're an incredible seller. And so you have to separate yourself. You have to have trust in your team. And if you do that, it makes those conversations, it allows you to get higher up quicker. And you can't just have one champion these days. You need multiple, because the way budgets are spent, it's impacting so many different departments that you need multiple champions, and you need to find out who are not champions to get them out of the way quicker, or at least get them out of the way. Help them understand where you can help them, right? Usually there's always a reason behind it. And so when you really get into it, you can find that. The second piece is the process. So what has been incredibly successful, I talked about the ROI. You need this on all deals because CFOs and budgets are just so tight. We talked about that. Another thing is the mutual success plan. So clearly identifying from where we're at today, if this is something that we mutually agree will be beneficial for our organizations, well, let's work on a plan. How do we make sure that this is a successful rollout? So we tend to work from the back, work from when they want the product launched or when they want your solution launched, and work backwards through implementation, through training. And a lot of times, obviously, that's going to get into like contract signatures, things like that. You want to take into consideration security, legal, and all the time that's built into that. So really knowing the process, I find the most effective reps on our team, they have built incredible relationships and they know inside and out what needs to happen. And if the buyer doesn't know necessarily what needs to happen, they're helping coach that buyer, which is also something. And the last piece is prioritization. So knowing what you should and shouldn't work on. What's your ideal customer profile? Because like the majority of organizations, we're asking our teams to do so much with so little, right? That's a common theme. So every person out there is working probably much harder today than they did last year, than they were the year before. And so in doing that, well, what opportunities make the most sense? Which ones should you just straight up say, it's probably not the right time, like let's explore this when it is, versus, okay, let's go a little deeper and take the next steps. Anyway, those are the three areas where I would focus on.
Wow, that's really, really good advice. And so for anybody listening, I want you to go back and listen to that again, and then maybe listen to it a third time and then share it with your team, because everything that Ryan said is 100% what, really the top reps and teams are doing. Those are the best practices, and a lot of teams, unfortunately, are not doing them. So amazing for you and your team. And another interesting stat that was in the report that I referenced earlier is that 69% of reps missed quota last year. And then, so that's why I'm, telling people to re-listen to that part again and again and really internalize.
Executives need to listen to it, right?
Yeah, just put it on repeat, because those are the things that are helping the top reps and teams win. So amazing. I feel like that could be, all of those pieces could be a podcast in and of itself, but a few other things that I want to touch on. But thank you for all of that really great insight and advice for our listeners. So I want to get a little more tactical and talk about the methodologies that you use for qualification and how they impact deal closure rates. So you mentioned a really key thing as well around what not to work on. Yeah. And one of the things that I often look for is, you should be closing deals, close lost deals twice as quickly as winning. So what are the methodologies? And then how do you coach and work with teams to say, okay, let's get this opportunity that will never close out so you can focus on and prioritize, to use your word, the ones that will?
Elizabeth, no is the second best answer. I've always been told that. So it's not the one we want, but it's number two. I would say you see a lot of people struggle with that, where they don't want to close out opportunities and they're reluctant to do so. And so as a leader, it's important for you to help call that out so they can reprioritize their time. I see that as part of my role, to just like being that third party, being that other view on it. Because if you're working a deal directly, if you're a rep working on a deal, you're emotionally attached to that. And it is very difficult to close loss. So as a leader, you need to call some things out and just be realistic. There's three things really that I would say overarching practices that we have. First, and this kind of outside of it, but we have regular forecast calls like weekly on what's progressing, what's happening. Most people do that. That's table stakes. So something that's been fairly new is trying to get commercial information up front in that first conversation. When I was first into sales, we were talking about this earlier, back in our Xerox days when we started our careers, it was almost like you waited till the end to present any type of the commercials. Let's show all the benefits. We need to get everything on the table. And then at the end is when it's all that anticipation. That's exactly it. And people just don't have time for that. And we don't as sellers either. So let's get the brass tacks. Let's understand, can we help? Is there an opportunity for us to help each other? Okay, if we can agree on that, what are you looking to do as a project? And if you can understand that, is there budget allocated for this project, or are you just window shopping right now?
Mm-hmm.
There's budget. And again, if you're doing that, totally fine. But as a rep, you need to know how to prioritize that. There's budget allocated. That's a different story. And so you need to know that budget allocation. You should also share a range of where you think this could be, right? And that's a good way to ask the question too. So here is what you should estimate in this project costing, both implementation and the license fee. Is that within range? Is that within your budget? Get that out of the way right away. And if it's not, well, then understand what that budget is. And there could be opportunities where maybe you scale back the scope of the project, right? The number one thing I always say is let's not lose an opportunity. If we have an opportunity to get a new customer or even just expand, a customer growth, if they want to do it, if there's mutual interest, let's find a way to make it work. And it might not be giving them the Ferrari right away. That's totally fine. Let's meet them where they are. Mm-hmm. And so that's first and foremost, the financials, the budget, doing that like early in the sales cycle so you can assess that out. The next is understanding the priority and timelines associated with it. So what is driving this interest? Is there something coming down from the executive suite, market factors? Is there a specific date and time where this needs to be launched by? And we talked about this earlier. It goes back to kind of working backwards, and it will help you. It just helps so much in the deal process. And the third element, and this is pretty tactical. We look at pipeline health. And so for me, it's a very quick and easy. And for all the leaders that are listening, if you have not talked to anyone in that organization over the last 30 days, or you don't have a next meeting booked, to me, that opportunity is dead. Get that, and don't even keep it out there. And, we struggle sometimes. I have this conversation with my team all the time where it's like, they'll kick it out or they want to kick it out a couple quarters. Kill it. Yeah. It's done. When you start seeing better engagement with the customer, let's bring it back to love. So that's how I see it. Those are always fun, tough conversations, but it's about helping them prioritize what's actually gonna make them successful.
Yeah, that dreaded push count.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things that I started to learn to look at. It's because if they want to keep it in the pipeline, and I get it, but I'm with you. Just get it out. Now, one of the areas that I think reps are struggling with as well, particularly in the last 18 months, because it's not that one decision maker. To your point, it's a larger group. So how do you identify and engage with the economic buyers effectively? And if the champion's being a blocker, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's difficult. If the champion's being a blocker, I wouldn't necessarily call them a champion. I would challenge that they're even a champion, right? Because with champions, I would say they understand the importance of having executive alignment. They understand that it is critical in order to secure this budget that, their executives, our executives connect and they build a trusting relationship. This is what it's all built on, right? And so I would double click if they're not doing it. And if they aren't doing it, I would understand why, probably dig a little deeper. But with economic buyers, the biggest thing is do it early and timely. You need to establish a relationship early on and maintain relevant contact throughout. As key milestones happen, maybe send them a note, be open to meeting with them, but not be in the day-to-day. We talked about this before. If you get into the day-to-day, you automatically discredit yourself as an executive sponsor on your side. It's done. So now you're just kind of the super rep, right? That's on everything. So you have to separate yourself, as difficult as that is. And another thing, you'll see this sometimes where at the end of the deal, it's like, hey, I need support, executive alignment here at the end of the deal. And I would say try to avoid those situations. Sometimes they're necessary, but the way to avoid it is to establish this very early in the deal. You can't expect your executives to swoop in and save the deals and things like that. It's difficult. And then once you begin the partnership, I would say that quarterly, biannually, whatever the cadence is, monthly, establish an ongoing meeting cadence so that you can stay connected with that individual. There's a lot of benefits that come from that.
Great. Well, that is wonderful advice for reps and leaders alike. So our last question for you, and I think I'm going to know the answer, but maybe you'll surprise me, is if you were to recommend any book or any material for anyone to read, what would that be?
I can't go any other direction, unfortunately, or surprise you. It is Radical Candor. There's a lot of great books out there, but Radical Candor for sure, from a leadership perspective, it really builds the framework on how you should lead.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I was expecting that, but I've read it before, but you know what? I'm motivated now to give it another read because it's been a few years. So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all this amazing insight and your experience. I think a lot of what we touched on, I've seen a number of people struggling with over the last 18 months. So highly relevant. And I think a lot of people will take a lot of learnings from this podcast. So really appreciate your time. Anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention before we end the podcast?
Yeah, it's a good broad question here. I would say double click on being a people leader. And the first word is people. And just, we got into this because we like interacting with people. We like helping people, right? And I would also say, just when you're working with your customers as well, it's become more challenging to get in person, as we know, because Zoom is very convenient. However, the best relationships with your team, with customers, that's all done in person. Mm-hmm. And so be intentional about it. It's not going to come as easy as it did pre-COVID, quite honestly. So you have to put in more effort, but that's a key part too, is putting in the effort. Mm-hmm. And so I would just challenge everyone, whether you're a people leader, whether you're a rep, whatever stage you are, make an effort to be in person as much as possible. So,
okay. Great call to action.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ryan. It was a pleasure talking with you. I could probably talk for another 2 hours about all of this stuff, but I'm sure you have a lot of things to get to. And anyway, so again, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate the time here, and thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome.